I have a secret. I used to write about a boy named Peter Moon.
Peter Moon is my favorite part of the story. A boy who lives their life, he don't understand his heart.
He strived to eliminate his bad habits. It started with no Netflix and continually escalated from there. He had to cleanse his life, rid himself of any distractions, so he could fill the void with worthwhile things. The next came no video games and no staying up past 10 and no junk food, and pretty soon it was all spiraling out of his control. In his effort to fill the void, he had only deepened it. It grew with a force so strong it sucked the rest of his life away, and before he knew it, this void had devoured everything he loved. And soon I found myself fighting the void. Peter wrote. My name is Mel, and today I am opening up about something that is very personal to me, which is my eating disorder story. This is not something I normally talk about openly. The reason why I've decided to film this video and talk about this publicly is because I've reached a point where I can say that I've officially recovered. I'm so happy that I'm not in that place anymore, but there is also a part of me that knows that I was not alone, and there are new people who are developing eating disorders all the time. I feel a responsibility to share my story online in the hope that even one person watching this will feel inspired to get better. I am not going to be discussing in detail my unhealthy eating habits. I'm also not going to be sharing any photos because I don't think that's going to be beneficial for anyone who does have unhealthy eating habits. I want to start off with an explanation of what atypical anorexia is. You're most likely familiar with the term anorexia nervosa. Some symptoms include an intense fear of gaining weight, a desire to lose weight, trouble concentrating, low self-esteem, fatigue, anxiety or depression, and suicidal thoughts. I experienced all of those things, and the reason why I was diagnosed with atypical anorexia and not anorexia nervosa is because I was not underweight. There is this scarily underweight image that is associated with the word anorexia, and if you don't look like that, it's really easy to convince yourself that you don't have a problem. And this is a very serious issue because, like anorexia nervosa, atypical anorexia can lead to serious health issues, hospitalization, and even death, despite not looking as dangerous. Between 25 to 40% of patients entering inpatient eating disorder treatment centers are diagnosed with atypical anorexia. Patients with atypical anorexia can be just as medically ill as patients with anorexia nervosa, and they can have even greater eating disorder psychopathology. Just because you look healthy doesn't mean you actually are healthy, and that goes both physically and mentally. The development of an eating disorder depends on a lot of biological, social, cultural factors. Some personality traits as well can make you more susceptible to an eating disorder. For example, if you are extremely ambitious and competitive and perfectionistic, and I definitely matched those qualities growing up. Looking back on my childhood, I can sort of pinpoint things here and there that may have contributed to my eating disorder, but there is no one thing or one big event that just made me have an eating disorder. I remember thinking, like, oh, I absolutely love food. Like, that could never be me. I just don't understand it. And yet I still ended up developing an eating disorder. So it's definitely not something you're born with, and it's also not something that happens overnight. Another thing that I wanted to address is this question of, why did you care so much about how other people saw you? I really feel strongly about breaking this misconception that eating disorders are all about body image. There is a lot of talk about social media and movies and celebrities and this unhealthy display of how bodies should look in the media. And that's definitely true, there's some truth to it. Once the eating disorder kind of had its grasp on me, social media did make it worse. There are a lot of horrible pieces of content on the internet that feed into eating disorders. There are some very toxic communities, but to say that it's all on the media is a huge misconception. I think social media played little to no role in the development of my eating disorder. What was the strongest really was this element of control. I wanted to be more of an outgoing person, and so I was really putting in the effort to get to know people and, to be more social and friendly, and it wasn't working. There were times when I performed really poorly on a test I studied a lot for, and I would see other kids ace those tests. I've had a lot of personal projects alongside school, and I remember feeling like the effort I put into those projects also wasn't paying off. Like, my books were going nowhere, my blog wasn't growing. When I first started restricting my food, it was not with the desire of any kind of outcome. I didn't do it to lose weight. I didn't even really understand why I was doing it. Seeing that have a result on my physical state and my mental state was really satisfying. One thing that I put intention into actually reaped results. The eating disorder gave me a sense of control that I felt was lacking in other areas of my life. It was something that I was able to hide very well. I still was a great student in school. I had a social life, I hung out with friends, and I kept writing books and pursuing all of my hobbies. Despite that fact, it still was a very big part of my life. I was just, in general, very weak and very moody. Anything related to food would make me upset. I just hated any mention of food. I also experienced a few panic attacks that would just come randomly as well. There were a lot of mental health issues that I experienced because of what I was doing and the unhealthy mindset that I had. Now you may be wondering how I could have restricted my food intake for 5 years and not be underweight. I was completely scared of the idea that I had an eating disorder. It freaked me out. So whenever my weight would get to the verge of unhealthy, I would start eating normally again out of fear. And then I would feel guilty for gaining the weight back, and I would restrict again. I was constantly gaining and losing the same 20 pounds over and over and over again, and it was exhausting and it was horrible. But all right, let's talk about Peter Moon. Let's talk about Peter. Peter Moon is a character from a book I wrote called Capsule. I wrote this book while I was in high school. His struggles were more in sync with my own struggles compared to any other characters in the story. I was actually working on the book Capsule during the absolute peak of my eating disorder. I was no longer in control of my habits. My habits were in complete control of me. And it was at that period of time when I started to really wonder if I did have a problem. Of the few people that I opened up to, it wasn't really taken very well. A lot of the times the response was like, "Oh, you look great, you shouldn't worry about it." Or "Oh, we're all insecure, we all skip a meal here and there, it's not a big deal." People really didn't understand that this was much more than a physical thing. This was much more than an insecurity. Because I felt like I couldn't really talk to anyone, or I didn't feel comfortable talking to anyone, writing really became my emotional outlet. I was also really inspired to break the stereotype that eating disorders are only for insecure teenage girls. There was actually one specific event that led me to feel so strongly about having, a male perspective on eating disorders. And that was based on a stranger I met. I was hanging out with friends one day, and some of their friends brought their friends. I ended up kind of off to the side talking to a stranger, and we ended up having a very deep conversation. He was a year younger than me, also a very ambitious student. He was very social. He didn't seem like the type of person who was struggling mentally. His story had nothing to do with wanting to look hot. Literally, those are his words, and hearing what he believed was the main contributor to his eating disorder really inspired me. I wanted Peter's character to have nothing to do with how he looked and everything to do with his desire to be perfect and his desire to do something right. Peter Moon was really two things for me. He was a way for me to spread awareness about a topic that was very, very important to me without having to open up in a public way. Peter Moon was also a source of therapy for me. Him taking the first steps toward recovery was sort of a way of me giving myself hope that this is something that I can overcome and I don't have to be stuck here, and maybe I can learn to not care and to not follow the rules that I've set for myself. I was able to experience a taste of healing before I was ready to heal myself. Publishing Capsule was a huge step in my recovery journey. People haven't really talked about it publicly in reviews and stuff, but I have received some very heartfelt emails and DMs from people who have really been able to relate to Peter's character that, means so much to me. Like, that was really my hope. After much debate and confusion, I had this realization of, I can't live like this forever. I got in contact with the hospital and talked to someone about what I was going through, and I really had pessimistic thoughts going into this because I genuinely didn't think anyone would take me seriously due to the fact that I was a normal weight, but they did take it very seriously. And when I was diagnosed with atypical anorexia, I was unexpectedly emotional. Like, it hit me really hard, I think because I had been denying it for so long. From that point, I was in touch with both a psychotherapist and a nutritionist whom I worked with for about a year. I am now at a point where the psychological aspects of my eating disorder no longer have their hold on me, and if I want to eat healthily and exercise, I feel like I can do that without it affecting my mental state. Whereas before, any habits somewhat related to my habits during the time of my eating disorder would have brought me back down a bad path. My message to anyone who is struggling with unhealthy eating habits: cut it off before it becomes too serious. And if you have been trying to cut it off and it's hard, that's a sign that it is too serious, and I really advise you to seek help. If you are wondering whether or not you have a problem, if that's been a huge stress to you, what I would say to you is that healthy people don't stress over whether they're sick enough. If you are not struggling with an eating disorder, then I really hope this video has been informational. Keep an eye on your friends and family, and if someone that you care about opens up to you about their unhealthy relationship with food, it probably took a lot of courage for them to do that, so please hear them out, because you never know how serious it could be. Before we end off, I would like to share that 100% of all profit for book sales of Capsule between today, November 22nd, and December 22nd will be donated to NAMI, a nonprofit organization with a mission to spread awareness about mental health. So if you'd like to read about Peter Moon and support a good cause, I'll have a link in the description below. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end of this video. Please give it a thumbs up so the algorithm will promote it to people who would maybe benefit from seeing it. And I will see you in the next video.